the reality is we have a number of challenges, right? And if you look at Finland, their results are based on trust, being able to trust institutions, free education, health, being able to know that they have a supportive system, a social system, maternity leave, paternity leave, their access to the outdoors, relatively low corruption rates, and a sense of common purpose. In my mind, it's a bit of a homogenous society. So they say they can trust each other. I'd like to hear from other panelists whether it's just the Good Hope story and our resilience that gets us to 83, or whether this happiness index is actually a little more complicated and omits some information that we need to be looking at. Karen?
Hi, I'm Khadijah. Just in terms of what I do, I'm actually a leadership coach, and I own a human capital development company where I work with corporates, academic institutions, and the public. In terms of the question that you've just posed, I think that the happiness index, obviously the financial criteria or matrix, is something that's actually at a very low percentage or percentile in terms of the actual evaluation when it comes to that. So I would to some extent concur with what you've just said. I think that financial instability and the gaps that we have in South Africa are huge. If we look at the Gini coefficient, South Africa fares extremely high in terms of the inequalities between the rich and the poor. So there's huge gaps. And as Dr. Nick alluded to the fact earlier on, I think the one thing that keeps our spirit up is the spirit of Ubuntu. It's that resilience and that shared hope. So if you look at the different elements on the happiness index, social connectedness, as well as the element of generosity, and that's with regards to various initiatives where people give back. I think that particular element, or both those elements, actually are the ones that will definitely influence South Africa's rating. But with regards to financial instability and the economic climate that we're in, even as a leadership coach, as I work in corporates and with individuals, I work on the model of the Wheel of Life. And financial aspects do play a pivotal role in terms of the challenges and the stress levels and the mental health challenges people are facing. Just to add on, recently, after the Government of National Unity came about, there was a survey done by a particular university, and they also measured the happiness index, and they found that it actually was quite high. And they used specific data, such as data from Google searches, etc., raw data. And they found that people were happier as a result of this shared unity, hope, as well as the spirit of togetherness. So I think the social connectedness is what boosts our happiness index somewhat, but I don't think it's a fair reflection of the actual state of happiness in the country altogether.
Okay, Karen.
So I'm a rapid transformational therapist. I work with mental health. I help people through emotional challenges. And I think that's one of the biggest foundations. And the biggest thing we need to work on is the mental health and the stability, the security, the support, how supported one feels, how safe one feels in their environment, how valued one feels in their environment. In terms of all the diverse cultures, I've worked with many, many cultures, and I can tell you all of them that I've worked with, bar none. There's a huge factor. People do not feel safe. You have to work on safety first, then security, and then learning to value yourself. Learning that we are all connected in that same connected need to be loved, to be adored, to be successful. Emotional well-being, for me, is the biggest factor in pulling it all together.
Thank you, Karen. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm a psychiatrist. And so I am very well versed in looking at mental illness, less so happiness. Happiness is something that's become en vogue after I left medical school. I'd like to argue, however, that this happiness scale is a individual person scale, doesn't reflect the economy, quite right so. And also it's in conflict with international trends and national trends in terms of what we see in terms of the mental health epidemic, depression being a very pressing problem in this country. So then one begs the question, is this happiness index report relevant? What is it measuring? When we look at, there's another measure of the mental health quotient, and South Africa lags way below. Very stressed distress. So when we want to know what we're measuring, it's important to understand this. I don't know if any of you have been to Scandinavian countries. Yes. Did you find that the people were happy when you interacted with them?
No, they came into a baby.
But your general interaction. So I would like to ask myself, when I'm there, people seem to be happy with what they have as opposed to be happy. Because high alcohol rates, high suicide rates, high antipsychotic medication prescribed. So what are we measuring? Yes, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, the socio-economic environment. Somebody mentioned earlier on about the recreation part of it. How I think how the society is structured.
Yes.
I think those things bring the level of health.
Yes.
When you walk out of, for example, you'll find a lot of ladies pushing back. No partners, and there's a park that you can go and reflect on. You can have a conversation with a lady that you never met before, but have a hearty conversation with that person, and allow your kids at whatever age to start bonding on play level, right? And play is a very important thing for kids, but also how we socially interact. Now in South Africa, the difficulty is that if I have to do that in Zoo Lake, the likelihood of me being mugged is high. Or if I have to do it outside of the park where I live, the likelihood of me being mugged is high, and statistics are there. So you don't get that level of social interaction. So, I may meet this lady now, and we may meet in the park and have a happy conversation. In Scandinavia, that's not in South Africa.
Not in South Africa, but interestingly, right, we rank along with Palestine, even though they're at war. So you're absolutely right that there's a problem, and this 83 ranking, I'm questioning its validity in terms of really measuring our happiness and whether it's really doing the job it ought to. But I'm going to hand over to my next panelist to talk about their view on the happiness report.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Veronique Genniker, and I'm very proud to be a leader of a social impact organization called the Marang Education Trust, and I'm also very blessed to be a global mindfulness teacher. I absolutely want to agree with the chair. I had the privilege 2 weeks ago to be part of the International Quality Conference that actually measures happiness. The one thing that we need to be very careful of as South Africans is the measures that are being used on us as a sector of the population to measure our well-being, to measure our happiness. The one thing we need to be very careful of is to use the measures in a contextualized manner. So I absolutely agree with our chair. I don't believe in our ranking, because how have they used the questions in a contextualized manner to measure us and where we are? The question we also need to ask is, if we are being measured, our happiness levels are being measured, what kind of data is being used? Because I can be very honest and say that the happiness index has been developed by economists. Really? Economists. And what data are they using? What methods are they using? They are using quantitative measures. And you and I know, and I love the fact that you talk about mental well-being, because that is so important. How do you measure happiness by doing or using a Likert scale? Give us a measure of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nobody asks, so what can you say to me about why did you measure yourself 1 and not 5? And that is where qualitative data needs to be coming in. And so as a country, I believe we should take notice of it. We shouldn't be dismissive of it, but we should be questioning. How did you get us to be 80 whatever? And I absolutely agree with her. I'm very blessed to travel the world in the work that I'm doing. And it is very interesting if you go into certain places which they say are the happiest. You ask yourself now, what the hell is going on here? I thought you were the happiest people. So my biggest concern is we need to question the methods that has been used. We also need to question where that research was done to get to the point. So I'm not being dismissive of it, but I'm just from a research perspective, I'm saying you need to use quantitative and qualitative data. And it needs to happen across a spectrum of, because none of us as South Africans are exactly the same. And so let's just be mindful of that, and let's just be careful when it comes to where we range on a global scale. Because we are in the global south, and we are using tools from the global north. And that says a hell of a lot for me.
So whilst I have you there, I was very interested to see their research methods being by survey and whether their numbers were powered enough, whether they were generalizable, and looking at the data, like how do we measure happiness in a culturally specific context? So forget the mental health aspects, but is our view of happiness the same? Because there are other scales that show that South American countries and African countries are actually happier, depending on what measures you're using.
Absolutely. From a cultural perspective, I'm also very blessed in the work that I do, is to work in very deep rural areas where poverty will shock the living daylights out of you. But within those pockets of poverty, depending on what my belief system is, depending on my cultural backgrounds, I have found some of the happiest people living in shacks. I found some of the most decent people living in shacks. So based on what is in your head, what is in your heart, what is in your environment, we all have moments of happiness. And that cannot be dismissed. And that, for me, is important. Like the Brand South Africa lady was telling us this morning, we need to find those pockets of happiness. We need to package them into stories. We need to be interested in that stories so that we can have a South African perspective of what it is to be happy. And that's important to me, to listen to the stories of people. We as academics aren't always the smartest people. Believe you me, okay? My PhD taught me one thing, sweetheart. I need to know so much more still. And so we need to be listening to the ordinary people. That's important for me.
And I think you raise important issues around the global south versus the global north. And what applies there doesn't necessarily apply to us. And who are the knowledge keepers? And how do we create our own knowledge system? So I'm now veering off the topic, but I want to get back to the workplace and to ask the panelists, what are there policies or strategies that the government can employ, organizations can employ, to really create inclusive, equitable environments for people at work?
So from a workplace perspective, I just want to say firstly that progress has taken place, but it's taken place in a way that has been very slow. If we think about our employment equity policy, the Skills Development Act, and we talk about inclusivity. So in my field of work, I'm very involved in inclusivity and working with individuals at leadership and in all levels within an organization to look at those aspects. We do diversity and inclusion workshops, etc. But there's still a lot of biases and subjectivity, and the integration needs to take place. Representation of women, especially in senior roles, is still far behind. So having said that, I'll still say on a positive note, I think there has been progress. We need to have more inclusive sessions like these, to have conversations with If we talk about women empowerment, we need male counterparts to sit in those rooms, not just women. We need to have more inclusivity when we talk about gender bias, so we talk about disability, etc. In the workplace, these are critical issues that need to be tackled. So it's very important to focus on aspects around emotional intelligence, spiritual intelligence, leadership training, and getting people on board to actually start becoming more inclusive at all levels.
Thank you. So policies are there, but the result, do we see it?
Well,
What is the
when
actual
it's
experience?
coming down to happiness, happiness has to start with knowledge. Happiness has to start with education. Happiness has to start with understanding. Everybody comes from a different background. So if you look, there's the self. You have to understand your personality, understand how you're relating to others, understand how you grew up. How was your environment, how your environment shaped you, how you look at the world, how you interact with the world. I think empowerment workshops are the most important workshops, empowering individuals to understand what are their strengths, embrace their weaknesses, expand their skills, expand their potential. That's the beginning, that's the core of happiness. Happiness starts inside. If you're happy and you understand yourself, your values, you know where you're going, you know what you have to offer, you're motivated. You're taking ownership. You're taking responsibility for your life. You're owning your life. You're loving your life. You're owning your choices. And it just brings the whole community together. So for me, it's empowerment workshops and it's knowledge and it's education.
And that's at the individual level. And I'd like to shift the responsibility from the individual level, where we're looking at the workplace policies and forces, to say, what is it, what's that key ingredient that those individuals need in terms of belonging? Because that's what the DEI policies should bring about, that you come in as this whole person who's worked on self, but that you feel acknowledged, seen, belonging, I think is the key aspect. You want to jump in there, Khadijah?
Yeah, just from my perspective, I think it's also creating an organizational culture of inclusivity. So there needs to be more inclusive sessions and forums to check on mental health and well-being, not just the policies are there to guide you in terms of these are the requirements so people know exactly what to do and not to do. But at the same token, it's about creating a shift in mindset and inclusive belonging. So mental health can't just be a wellness program. Organizations, they think about implementing several wellness initiatives, but it's more about a culture of checking in on people on a daily basis to see how you're doing. Recently, I did a climate survey within a tech company, and out of that particular survey, in terms of the results, and that's a private industry, many people said they suffer from exhaustion, burnout, and the lack of involvement where people are actually checking in on how they're really doing. So I think there has to be some form of, shared participation, inclusivity, and a culture that has to shift and change.
And I'd like to hear from Dr. Nick about the kind of leadership that will nurture, move beyond the policy, the talk around DEI, which is very fashionable. And I'm speaking about belonging. You've mentioned culture, but is there a leadership style? You speak about checking in. Is there a way in which we can ensure that DEI is something that happens and is not just on paper, that you report to, the Department of Labor about, what equity strategies you have, that it's actually something that's a lived experience for individuals in the workplace?
Look, I think what we need to look at is we need to look at the country level. And you might have seen the Student Confidence Index that was conducted every single year. 90% of university graduates want to leave the country because of lack of opportunity. The one question we need to ask is how can we create jobs at scale? That's really the key. We must create opportunities. We must give everybody the opportunity to live up to their full potential. That's the definition of prosperity. And we got to create jobs at scale. That's the only way.
Okay. So once you're in the workplace and you haven't left the country, how do we keep you there? You're a woman in the C-suite, but you don't feel there's belonging?
The one thing that I think is very important, it's wonderful to say that we need to be checking in with one another. The one thing that's even more important is to call one another out. Because too often in the workplace, it's wonderful to do these check-in sessions. Okay? So now you know how you're feeling, what are the pressure points, and what are the struggles that you have. But what about calling one another out? And I'm not saying doing it in a disrespectful way. And I'm not saying showing one another up. So all of us work within organizations where we can name the people who are disrespectful. We can name the people who keep the doors closed to other people. And so how do we develop a culture where we start also calling one another out? There's this thing about walking around in the office and we're making a joke. And we're not realizing that the jokes that we're making is actually hurting certain people. It's disrespectful to certain people. So it's about checking in. It's about calling out. And it's also, and I love the idea, it's not a one-size-fits-all. We need to find out from our workforce what's hurting you. What is really hurting you? That's a check-in. We need to be observant and we need to be calling people out. And then we need to put mechanisms in place to correct what has happened. And that is how you slowly start showing your workforce that you are serious about this thing of developing diversity, inclusivity, and belonging. I always say people do not give a damn how smart you are. People give a damn about how much you care. And if you show people that you care, you will get the best out of people. You will then be able to create opportunities. But people do not want to come and work for companies where they know the culture is not one of inclusivity. And that's important.
What you're saying is so important. We look at sexual harassment and women in the workplace. And one of the key interventions that's been shown to help is bystander actions. So we witness the bullying, whether it's sexual harassment, whatever form it may take. What is our responsibility? To highlight it, to witness it, to say it's not okay to a colleague. That's an individual responsibility that we can take, but we also need protection, obviously, in very toxic environments, with the kind of leaderships that we would need to have to take on that challenge. I've been told we only have 2 minutes, so I'm going to give each one of you an opportunity to really summarize what you think the key issues are around happiness, creating happy environments in the workplace, improving engagement, and on an individual level, corporate level, and as a country. So I'll start with you, Dr. Eberl. Nick.
Thank you. So I think what we need to do every minute of the day, we get to create opportunities for the youth. We cannot carry on with a situation where 70% of the youth are unemployed. That, to me, is the number one priority.
Thank you.
We have to create a sense of belonging, a sense of support and value in the workplace, a sense of understanding of all the cultures, and we have to encourage open, honest communication, encourage leaders to be vulnerable, encourage leaders to share their journeys, their growth, build trust within the company, cultural awareness, surveys, finding the balance between home and work, and then bringing in the mental health specialists to help move through the self-doubt, the fear of failure, the stress, and whatever is holding anybody back, and expand their potential. So I'm very into pro-mental health.
From our side, I would like to just mention that, as Nelson Mandela said, it's not just about Ubuntu in terms of shared connectedness, it's about action. So as we're discussing today, there needs to be certain steps taken in terms of creating this unity and inclusivity in terms of diversity and people having a shared role and participation and feeling loved, feeling seen, feeling heard, feeling understood. Because those are the basic needs if we look at individuals in terms of where they're at. Also, in organizations, we need to have transformational initiatives. And as our speaker now spoke about, yes, it's good to have these inclusive forums, but you have to call people out. So you need to also have mechanisms that are put in place, whether it's whistleblowing, whether if you're a bystander to someone being sexually abused or you see something happening, there needs to be a forum and a channel. In some organizations that I work with, we have champions that are ambassadors of change. So those individuals are trained in terms of coaching, they're trained in terms of mentoring others, and they serve as facilitators. If someone is having a challenge, to go to that individual if they feel that they have a safe space that they can speak to someone in the workplace. So I think there needs to be more creative ways of creating that kind of openness in terms of creating those channels. Finally, I just want to say, I heard this African proverb which says that a child who is in a village, who feels totally excluded and feels like there is no nurturing, will end up burning the village, just so that they can feel the warmth of the village. And that really had a profound impact on me when I listened to it, because the mere fact that we in this country even scored what we did on that happiness index, which, yes, is extremely questionable. For me, it says that our resilience, our ability to have that shared connectedness is what keeps us alive. So we need to keep pursuing that and growing that at every level.
I'd like to say that by virtue of being a human being, each and every single one of us needs to strive daily to be authentic and kind. Doesn't matter who you engage with. You need to be the role model. You need to be the change agent. If you want change, then be the change.
Thank you. You can hold on to that. That's wonderful. Thank you to the speakers on the panel. And I just wanted to remind us all about happiness. 50% might be genetic, 10% might be an environment. So certain researchers say, and the next 40% is things that we can take charge of ourselves. A practice of kindness, forgiveness, supporting each other, compassion, meditation, being mindful, spirituality. So we can all work on this ourselves in our internal world. And I think that that's the message for today, how we can, from inside, go outward and spread our happiness. Thank you for being a great audience.
Thank you for being a great chief.